Jasmine, a lively 20-year-old, lived with blurry eyesight since childhood. Despite this challenge, she radiated joy and refused to let it hinder her spirit. Determined to see the world clearly, she regularly visited her eye doctor in hopes of a corneal transplant. Though the wait was lengthy, Jasmine remained hopeful. Knowing that her patience would ultimately be rewarded, Jasmine received the long-awaited call from her doctor, informing her of an available eye donor. In just a week, she would undergo surgery. Although anxious about the unknown, Jasmine's desire to see clearly outweighed her fear. On the day of the surgery, lying on the operating table, her heart raced. The room buzzed with medical equipment and hushed conversations. As the anesthesia took hold, Jasmine's world faded into darkness. Jasmine's eyes fluttered open as the operation neared its end. To her astonishment, she saw a group of unfamiliar people dressed in black standing behind the doctors. Among them were an elderly couple and 2 children, their expressions unsettling. Overwhelmed, she closed her eyes tightly, seeking solace from the eerie sight. Soon, she fell into a deep sleep, finding temporary relief. However, the unsettling encounter lingered in her thoughts. Jasmine woke to a terrifying sight: a woman with a twisted smile and a child with bleeding eyes and an eerie grin. Filled with fear, she fled down the hospital hallway, pursued by these haunting figures. She ran until her legs gave out, and they caught up to her. She screamed, her voice echoing through the empty hallway, and shut her eyes tightly, bracing herself for the worst. Suddenly, she woke up. She was in her hospital bed, in her room. The operation was over. She touched her eyes, her heart still racing. She looked around, half expecting to see the nightmarish figures. But she was alone. It took her a moment to realize that it had all been a dream. After several weeks of recovery, Jasmine was ready to return to the hospital for her follow-up appointment. With bated breath, Jasmine watched as the doctor carefully removed the bandages from her eyes. Slowly, she opened her eyes, and her breath caught in her throat. Standing before her was the girl from her dream. The shock was paralyzing, and Jasmine felt frozen in fear. In the background, the doctor's voice faded as they asked about her well-being, the discomfort in her eyes, and her vision clarity. But all Jasmine could see were the figures from her dream, now seemingly intertwined with her reality. Trying to maintain her composure, Jasmine looked around the room. The same people who had terrified her in the operating room and in her dream were there, their presence as chilling as ever. As Jasmine left the hospital, she felt a shiver run down her spine. She had finally gained the clear vision she had always dreamed of. But along with it came a terrifying reality she had never imagined. One day, after returning from her usual visit to the park, Jasmine made a decision. She decided to remove the bandage from her eyes. It was a decision she had been wrestling with, filled with apprehension due to the terrifying visions she had experienced before. A wave of relief washed over her, followed by a surge of joy. She was finally able to see the world in all its beautiful detail, just as she had always dreamed. The nightmare seemed to be over, and Jasmine could now truly start enjoying her newfound vision. Jasmine's clear vision allowed her to resume her job as a secretary at a dentist's office, finding it easier and more enjoyable. One evening, while waiting for the bus, she sat next to an elderly woman. To her horror, the woman had the same distorted face, bleeding eyes, and chilling smile from her visions. Jasmine quickly got off the bus and ran in a panic. Despite stumbling, she kept going, driven by the need to escape. Her only focus was getting away from the haunting figure pursuing her. Jasmine sought refuge in a dark, secluded area, her heart racing. To her surprise, the child from her nightmares appeared and signaled for her to stay quiet. Following the child's guidance, Jasmine hid behind a pile of sacks, hoping to evade the terrifying figures once and for all. As Jasmine cowered behind the sacks, her heart pounding in her chest, she couldn't help but let out silent tears. She was terrified, unsure of what was happening or what she should do. Peering through a small opening in the sacks, Jasmine saw a horrifying sight. The old woman was dragging a girl by her hair, while a child cried and pleaded for her to stop. "Mommy, please don't hurt my mommy," the child screamed. As Jasmine watched the scene unfold, she realized with a jolt of recognition that these were the same people who had haunted her since her operation. The old woman, the girl, the child, they were all familiar figures from her nightmares. But now, they were not just figures from a dream. Jasmine witnessed a horrifying scene as the old woman brutally stabbed the girl's eyes, turning her into a mirror image of the haunting figures from Jasmine's nightmares. The girl's face became pale, her eyes bleeding and filled with desperation. With a chilling laugh, the old woman proudly displayed the girl's eyes as a gruesome trophy. Jasmine realized in terror that the figures from her nightmares were victims of this monstrous woman. The child's screams filled the air, but they were abruptly cut off as the old woman turned her attention to him. Jasmine watched, frozen in terror, as the woman was about to take the child's eyes too. Despite her terror, Jasmine knew she couldn't just stand by and let this horror continue. Gathering all the courage she had, she stood from her hiding place and rushed towards the old woman to save the child. In her hand, she clutched a stone she had found near the sacks. With a yell, Jasmine swung the stone, hitting the old woman squarely in the head. The woman staggered, and Jasmine hit her again, this time aiming for her eyes. The old woman fell to the ground, her chilling laughter replaced by a groan of pain. Jasmine stood over the motionless woman, her heart racing. As she looked down, she was horrified to see the woman's bleeding eyes, resembling the terrifying image from her nightmares. The bodies of the woman and child had vanished, leaving only the old woman behind. Shaken but resolute, Jasmine called 911 for help. Within minutes, the police arrived at the scene. As the police investigated, Jasmine learned the horrifying truth. The old woman had been responsible for the death of a mother and her child. Driven by desperation and despair, the woman had taken their lives in a misguided attempt to cure her own son's blindness as she couldn't afford an operation. Jasmine discovered the horrifying truth. The event had occurred a month ago, with the child's eyes being donated after his tragic death. The connection to the child and his mother was chilling and heartbreaking. Yet Jasmine felt grateful for the gift of sight and resolved to honor the child's memory by embracing life and appreciating the world around her.